Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to talk to you a little bit about rhetoric and rhetorical choices. Because the course is short and because the unit is short, instead of assigning several book chapters, I want to go over the information I would have covered in video format, okay? So you already should have read the prompt and already read at least one chapter related to rhetoric. Okay, rhetoric is a fancy word that just means the art of being persuasive or using language persuasively. It's just a fancy word that points to the kinds of choices that writers and speakers make when they are communicating. Okay, so one example I give my students to understand this is like maybe in high school you were told by your high school teacher that you should always start your 5-paragraph essay with an anecdote, a little story, right? And so you always learned to start your 5-paragraph essay or whatever essay you were writing with a little story. Other people may have learned to start it with a question, a rhetorical question, right? And it's called a rhetorical question because you're doing it for effect. You're doing it for the art of asking the question rather than getting an answer, right? So some people choose to start with an anecdote, and other people might choose to start with a question, a rhetorical question. Other people might choose to start with a quotation that they got off the internet, right? All of these are choices that the authors are making about how to start their essay. And when we listen to writers and speakers every day on TV, on the internet, politicians, our teachers, texts we read, they're either really effective rhetorical choices or they're really ineffective rhetorical choices. Now, whether it's effective or not has a lot to do with audience, right? So if I'm writing for an audience of, let's say I'm writing a movie review and I'm reviewing the latest superhero movie, and my audience is parents who are thinking about taking really young children to see the movie. Well, the kinds of things I'm going to focus on when I'm saying whether or not the movie was good or not is going to be different for those parents, right? Than it would be if maybe the audience for my review was people who are really into comic books and know every detail of the comic books that this movie is based on, right? So if I'm writing my review for parents of young children, they might read my review and say, wow, these rhetorical choices were really effective. I really liked what she focused on. I really like the little jokes she told about kids crying and whatever. And they might find my review effective. Whereas somebody who's really interested in comic books, who's maybe an adult moviegoer, would read that review and maybe they wouldn't find those choices maybe as effective for them, but if they put in their minds, well, she didn't write it for me, she wrote it for parents with young children, then they could still evaluate my choices with that in mind. So when we're evaluating the choices that a writer or speaker makes, you know, when to tell a joke, how to organize their information, so on and so forth, and we're deciding whether they're effective or not, we really need to keep in mind their audience. We also need to keep in mind their purpose, right? If they're talking about something really sad, it wouldn't be effective to tell jokes, maybe. Or maybe it would be really effective to tell jokes and break up the tension. So you got to consider the purpose, the audience, and the last thing is the genre. What is this supposed to be, right? So if I'm writing a movie review, it might be a really bad movie review. It might look like something that's not a movie review. Or if I'm writing a comic and it's not at all what a comic is supposed to look like, then I have made maybe poor rhetorical choices when I was designing my comic because I wasn't paying attention to what a comic looks like, right? So we always got to pay attention to audience, purpose, and genre. Who was this written for? Why was it written? And what is it supposed to be? Like, what kind of document is it supposed to be? And with that in mind, we read it very, very carefully and we look at the rhetorical choices that the writer or speaker made. Now, the kinds of things you can look at is anything that got your attention, right? Anything that you noticed maybe that you liked when you were reading or didn't like when you were reading. So, for example, the way it was organized. If the writer or speaker tells a little story, tells a little joke, the logic of their argument, facts they gave. Were they good facts? Were they bad facts? Were they convincing facts? Then you can talk about examples they gave, things they emphasized, word choice. Did they use really big words that alienated the audience? Did they use really good, personable language that you think really helped the audience connect, right? So when we're looking at rhetoric, we're really looking at the nitty-gritty. So rhetoric is not about what they argued, it's about how they argued. So if I ask you to analyze a text about illegal immigration, right, and I'm just asking you to respond to the ideas, then you might tell me if you agree that illegal immigration is the right thing, or if we need to have more laws, or if we need to have less laws, or what. But if I tell you to rhetorically analyze a text about illegal immigration, then your job is not to tell me whether you agree with illegal immigration or not. Your job is to really look, first you have to read it to understand it. What is the argument? And then your job is to go back to it and look at how did the writer create this, right? Because we're all, especially professional writers, we're revising, we're editing, we're moving things, we're deleting things, we're explaining things more. And so when we decide to delete something, that was a choice. When we decide to explain something more, that was a choice. When we decide to start with a quotation mark, that was a choice. Every little thing that you do as a writer is a choice, even if you're doing it subconsciously. So coincidentally, one of the reasons we focus on this unit is because we want to get to the point where you as a writer start to think about these choices consciously and start to question, is this the best way for me to write this? And again, you have to think about who is my audience, what is my purpose, and what is the genre, right? Who am I writing this for? Why am I writing it? And what is this supposed to be? Right? Is it supposed to be an essay? Is it supposed to be a reflection? Is it supposed to be a blog post, discussion board? And that should affect your changes. Just as a brief aside, the genre really does affect your choices because, think about how you write a text message versus how you would write an essay. I'm sure that you're using slang, you're using shorter sentences, you might not be capitalizing, you might be using a lot more ellipses, ... in a text message. Whereas when you write, or at least you should, when you write an essay, you're going to write longer sentences, you're going to capitalize everything, you're not going to use slang. Those are choices you are subconsciously making based on the genre, right? I subconsciously know that I'm allowed to do this in a text message and I'm not allowed to do this in an essay. Now, if you turned in an essay where you were using text-like slang, not capitalizing anything, those would be poor rhetorical choices. Those would be bad rhetorical choices because you were not respecting the genre, okay? So in the next unit, instead of making you write one really long paper where you get really heavy into this, instead you're going to get a lot of practice looking at different texts. For each one, first you need to read it to make sure you understand it. And I've left you a lot of questions there at the top of every post to basically help you understand the text. If you know the answers to all those questions, then you probably understood the text. If you're looking over those questions and you're like, whoa, wait, what? I didn't catch that. Then you probably need to read it again. You need to make sure that you understand the text first, okay? And then you go back and your actual assignment based on the understanding is to analyze the rhetorical choices that the writer made. Okay, so you will briefly summarize the main points of the text to show that you read it and you understand it. Okay, what was the argument, or what was the author's point here? What were they trying to get the reader to understand? Then you will analyze some of the choices that the author made. And this is important. You need to pick specific moments in the text. You can't just say, like, the author used humor and I thought that was effective. Okay, you have to actually say, the author used humor. For example, in paragraph 3, he makes a joke about blank, right? So that you're pointing my attention and the other people in the class's attention to exactly where you thought the joke was. Because maybe that you thought that was a joke and we didn't think it was a joke, right? Or, whatever. So you're helping the reader, us, the rest of the class, understand where you saw that, right? So you have to say, I thought this example of humor that he used in paragraph 2 when he joked about blank was effective, right? And then you need to explain why you think it was effective, right? Because humor is not always effective, for example, right? So nothing Nothing that you can see. Humor, storytelling, organization, examples, statistics. Nothing that you can see in a text is always effective in every situation. There are situations in which facts and statistics are really not appropriate. There's situations where personal stories are really not appropriate. So you need to explain why in this situation, given his or her message to the audience, why did you think that choice was effective, or why did you think it was ineffective, okay? And then you can speculate on some of the reasons why they might have made that choice. Why do you think they included a joke there? Why do you think they organized in that way? Why do you think they used that kind of vocab? Whatever you're pointing to, what was it that you saw? Was it effective or not? Why? And why do you think they did that? Okay? And that is the main thrust of all of these. So every time you're given a text, you're going to read it to understand it. And then your actual post is going to start by summarizing the main points so that we know that you know what it was supposed to be about. And then you're going to go over some examples of some things that you thought were effective or ineffective in getting their message across. Okay? Now, the other main thing about this assignment is I'm always trying to sneak in ways to teach you better writing, okay? So sometimes it's less obvious, sometimes it's more obvious, but in this case, we're going to focus on concision, right? In many cases, many of you spent your lives with teacher telling you to write longer, more complex sentences, And that made sense because you would turn in little baby sentences, right? And your middle school teacher and your high school teacher saw these little baby sentences and they said, you need to learn to combine your sentences. Well, what happens is a lot of times students get to college and they write these really long, complicated, grammatically incorrect sentences. But the most important thing is they didn't even need half those words, right? You learn to add a lot of fluff to your sentences to satisfy those teachers. But effective writing in English, in American Standard English, is considered that, long sentences are great as long as every word needs to be in that sentence. Long, just for the sake of being long, is not a good sentence. If you could say it in 10 words instead of 20, then you should say it in 10 words instead of 20. So another part of this assignment is you need to stay under 300 words, which sounds like that's a lot of words. But not if you're really answering the questions. If you're really answering the questions of what are some of the choices they made, where did they make them, was it effective or not, and why do you think they made those choices? And you can add a little bit of your opinion, and you need to start with a summary. That's a lot of things to include in 300 words. So I want you to write it in a Word document first, and then go to Tools and Word Count. I think in the newer version of Word, it's under Review, and then you go to Word Count and see how many words you have in the document, okay? As a side note, if you don't have Microsoft Word, you get it for free through FIU. As an FIU student, you get Microsoft Office for free. So just Google FIU Microsoft Office, and you can get it for free on your computer. Okay, all right, so that should help you understand rhetoric and rhetorical choices, hopefully, and the thrust of this assignment. So the goal here is to always focus on you understanding a writer's meaning, and then you examining their choices. What were the things they did when they crafted this argument, and what worked and what didn't? And again, this is practice because eventually you want to get to the point where every time you write something, you're making those same decisions. Did I really, I wrote a draft of this email, and was the joke I told in paragraph 2, of my email really effective? Maybe I shouldn't have included that joke. Or, is my email organized in the way that makes the best sense for the message I'm trying to get across? Or maybe I should have used bullet points. Maybe bullet points would have been a better rhetorical choice. So on and so forth. Maybe the way I started this email, instead of "Hi guys," maybe I should have used a different choice because that might have been more rhetorically effective. And again, that goes back to audience. Who is my email for? If it's for work, "Hi guys" is not really the best rhetorical choice unless it's a very, very small, very, very close-knit office, right? And so who is my audience? What is my purpose? What is the message about? Is it about how we're going to go out for drinks on Friday, or is it about something work-related? And then genre, it's an email, so it should still be proofread with capital letters and punctuation. It's not a text message. And a lot of times that gets blurred because people send emails from their phone and they write them almost like text messages, but that's a no-no, right? Because the genre convention of text messages is different than the genre conventions of an email. Anyways, hopefully this helps you get the general idea of the assignments. We're going to repeat it over and over again. You're going to do 4 blogs total. Each time the assignment is generally the same, except I give you different guiding questions. And then in part 2 of the assignment, which I will give you another video and explain, you're going to revisit one of those and you're going to make it better and longer. So you're going to go back to your post and evaluate your own rhetorical choices and expand your response to a longer paper. And we'll talk about that later. But right now we're just focusing on the blogs. If you have any questions at all, please just email me. I'm here to answer any of your questions, okay? Happy writing.